morning and welcome to another episode of Iconic Freedom, the Formula. We're setting a standard for accountability of outcomes based on the responsibility of the choices you make. Let each care for self and all will be cared for.
You've borne false witness against your neighbour. You've played fast and loose with his reputation, and you should be heartily ashamed. So, the woman said she was sorry and asked for forgiveness. Not so fast, says O'Rourke. I want you to go home, take a pillow up on your roof, cut it open with a knife, and return here to me. So the woman went home, took a pillow off her bed, a knife from the drawer, went up the fire escape to her roof, and stabbed the pillow. Then she went back to the old parish priest as instructed. Did you gut the pillow with a knife? He says. Yes, Father. And what was the result? Feathers, she said. Feathers, he repeated. Feathers everywhere, Father. Now, I want you to go back and gather up every last feather that flew out on the wind. Well, she said, it can't be done. I don't know where they went. The wind took them all over. And that, said Father O'Rourke, is gossip.
If you have not seen the movie Doubt, I truly recommend it. It was such a great movie. And these types of stories have been told over and over again, and they really are amazing as things get exposed in the story, as they do in real life. Okay, so that is talking about gossip. Gossip is a lie, and that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the lie that media and politicians do. You can throw in Hollywood, you can throw in, plays and musicals and whatever else you want to do, series on Netflix, whatever it is, that lie and perpetuate a lie. How many times has a lie been told over and over and over again? And then how many attitudes have been formed from the lie, whatever the lie is? You lie to someone, they start to think that there's a reality, they start to act on that reality. So let's establish this baseline. The people have a right to reality. What happens to the body when lies get compounded? An individual will have like a sense of that something is off, right? That there's a disturbance or a disruption from a lie or from multiple lies. You can be in a conversation, or you can be watching something, in a movie or on TV, or you can be watching the news or listening to somebody doing a report. And you can tell there's just like this little unsettling that occurs because, it's just like you think, does that sound right to me? It's like, something seems off. And you may not know what is actually off, but you have a sense that something is incorrect. That unsettling will not be satisfied until there is a pursuit of the truth, of the reality. It's why when we watch, movies and we watch mysteries and dramas and, all these kinds of things, espionage types of stories, that we find it so fascinating, and we go through this journey because we want people to find out what's the reality, what's going on with this story. And when we get to the end, we have such satisfaction of it. I mean, you'll notice that for yourself, right? That by the time you get to the end of the movie, you're like, wow, that was amazing. It's so cool. And that's why movies are made quite often in that realm where they come to basically an ending, they come to a conclusion where everything is exposed and all of the reality is exposed, and it brings a peacefulness to everyone. Well, that is not dissimilar to what goes on in our own lives. And now we see what's going on currently with the President of the United States and the recent debate that he had back at the end of June.
Joe Biden, after cannonballing into an empty swimming pool on Thursday night, came out tonight and spoke for 4 minutes off of a teleprompter. He's good for 4 minutes today, as long as somebody else wrote it. After having this completely tone-deaf sort of announcement coming out of this meeting that you wrote about with his family this weekend, where his son, the notorious influence peddler and crack addict, Hunter Biden, says, you got to keep going. Also, they were hanging out with Annie Leibovich, the photographer, which I wasn't even aware she was taking mugshots now. This entire thing since Thursday has been one tone-deaf political disaster after another. Tonight, he comes out and attacks the Supreme Court and says, oh, the president can now do whatever he wants. The same guy, by the way, whose centerpiece of his speeches is, the Supreme Court tried to stop me. They blocked me, but they'll never stop me on student loans. I don't know what they are doing because they don't know what they're doing, and no one in America knows what they're doing, and that's why Donald Trump's beating his brains in right now.
Some of them, he said, he's the only president in a while who didn't have any troops dying anywhere in the world. Troops have, of course, died on his watch. He said he's put in a $15 per shot cap on insulin and Medicare. It's a $35 a month cap. He said it's a $200 cap on overall drug spending in Medicare. It's $2,000 a year. He said the border now has fewer crossings than when Trump was in office. That's generally not true. He said, or at least strongly suggested, unemployment was at 15% when he took office. It was actually 6.4. He said Trump wants to get rid of Social Security. Trump doesn't. He said billionaires pay 8.2% in taxes. It's much higher. He said Trump told Americans to inject bleach amid COVID. We know Trump made foolish comments about scientists studying disinfectant injection, but didn't frame it as advice to people. And Biden said the Border Patrol endorsed him. No, its union supported the border bill he'd supported, never endorsed him himself.
So there is a relentlessness of people lying and trying to overwhelm a general public with lies. They figure if they keep saying the lie and they keep saying it over and over and over again, that people will just believe it because they don't have time to delve into it. I mean, that guy at the end there, I mean, he was just, one thing after another. Boom, boom, boom. He was basically refuting all of the lies because people don't have time to go and research all of these things. There's a great article, and I'll put the link down below, by Molly Hemingway in The Federalist that debunks the 20 lies that Biden told during the debate. Now, let's get back to this other piece of it, though. The brain, when it is overwhelmed by a story, it will go into a self-preservation by justification, rationalization, and the like. The conscious mind will basically come up with an alternative story that is more palatable to digest. And a life that lives in contradiction from those lies will have no peace at all. And that's the disturbing part, is that you have politicians and media and the news and Hollywood and writers of all kinds of stories that don't care. And I don't know what their motivation is. I can only surmise that when you follow the money, it's usually about the money, right? That's usually where it all stems from. I will have another clip towards the end of this podcast that actually talks about COVID. So you've had a lot of lies that have been exposed and unmasked over the last few years, right? That have come to our understanding. They've come to the forefront. They've come to our consciousness. And that we cannot be satisfied. We cannot have peace until we expose the lie. And people will keep telling the lie as long as they can get away with it. So one of the things that I came across this week, and my friend John is the one actually who turned me on to this podcast. It was by Bari Weiss on her show called Honestly. And I've listened to her stuff before, and I think I actually did a podcast with her material with an NPR guy back in April who had his own epiphany about a bunch of lies, here we go again, that the media were covering up. And this particular one was about Matthew Shepard. Now, I don't know how many of you recall the whole incident regarding Matthew Shepard. It happened, I think, in October of, I want to say, 1998, if I'm not mistaken. And what happened to him? Apparently, these two young men, he tried to come on to them. This is the story that we were told. He tried to come on to them, and they, they freaked out. They, had a gay freak out, and they beat the hell out of him. They tied him to a fence and, beat him some more and left him there, and probably didn't know he was going to die. But he did eventually die. He was there for a number of hours. They finally found him, took him to the hospital, and that's where he died. And then, of course, Laramie, Wyoming just wound up having this horrible reputation. And, immediately all this stuff went out that, we need to pass legislation for hate crimes. And the Laramie Project was formed, and the Matthew Shepard Foundation was formed, and, and the money keeps rolling in, right? But what if everything you've heard about that story is a lie? What if everything about that narrative didn't actually happen that way?
They wanted to make Laramie evil. And they've done a good job of it. Because there's a lot of people that think Laramie's a terrible place. And they're afraid to come here, which is really sad.
One of the biggest ironies of the Matthew Shepard story is that Laramie, home to the University of Wyoming, is one of the most liberal cities in the state.
At the time of the case, I was a detective on the Laramie Police Department.
You've said that this case was not about homophobia. So if it wasn't about homophobia, what was it about?
It was about methamphetamine and, the money behind it, and Aaron trying to get his hands on more of it.
In 2004, Stephen Jimenez produced the first report that complicated the hate crime narrative around Matthew Shepard's death. He went on to spend years researching and in 2013 published The Book of Matt, an authoritative history of the murder. When I asked Stephen Jimenez about his findings, he told me that the idea that Matthew and his killer, Aaron McKinney, were strangers was a misconception.
Aaron McKinney had a relationship with Matthew. They were both involved with methamphetamine. Aaron in particular had been addicted for 3 years. He was dealing, and Aaron was deep into it. Matthew had also dabbled quite a bit with methamphetamine, and there was pre-existing conflict with Matt and Aaron. Aaron was trying to persuade Matt into advancing him some drugs, and Aaron would pay him the money later. And Matt wouldn't do it. Matt wanted the money, or he wouldn't give him the drugs. So Aaron was pissed off. And that's not the first time Aaron got pissed off at Matt. I interviewed many people who were associates of both of them that had socialized together. And there's no doubt in my mind, because when over a dozen sources say, we were at parties together, we were at parties at, certain people's houses, we were at parties at Matt's apartment.
They all partied together.
His findings were echoed by a local Laramie business owner we spoke to who requested anonymity.
I've seen them together. I know all three of them. They didn't have to lure anybody.
That evening, Aaron McKinney was looking for Matt, and he was kind of on a search.
What was Aaron looking for Matthew for?
Aaron was looking for Matt because that night there was a shipment of methamphetamine coming, and it was a regular shipment. These shipments usually came like every 2 weeks. And in this case, this was being handled by a group of friends of Matt's from Denver. And a few of those people actually were from Laramie and lived in Laramie. A few of them moved back and forth. And so what would usually happen is that shipment of meth, half of it would be dropped in Fort Collins and the other half in Laramie. And so that night, Aaron McKinney was looking for either the 6 ounces of meth or the money if Matthew had already passed it on to someone else. Aaron had also been up on meth for a week.
Another piece of information left out of history's first draft was that Matthew Shepard's murderer wasn't even straight.
Aaron was bisexual. I knew at least that much.
How did you know that?
From other police dealings and kind of compromising positions he was found in and places. You know, the narrative on the hate crime, it's like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
I really encourage you to listen to both the podcast from Bari Weiss and then also the YouTube one. There are some things that are added to one and not the other, and it's an interesting story. It's a very interesting story because what wound up happening was that the girlfriend of one of the guys, Aaron Russell, I think is his name, that wound up being the one that murdered Matthew Shepard, and the other kid was the accomplice. She decided that she was going to concoct this story with a girlfriend of hers, and they were going to try to go through this whole thing. And you know, that police detective that you just heard from, you know, he's a pretty smart guy, and you know, both of their stories were identical. You know, if people they're recounting a story, they're not going to be able to recount, you know, every single detail to be exact. There's going to be some things that will basically cross over, be similar, but not exactly the same. Well, both of them apparently were exactly the same, and it was kind of a dead giveaway. That's what happens with people that lie, is that they don't do it very well. But what about the people that do it very well? So a lot of people will say, oh, well, they're very smart. They're not smart. They're sinister. They're diabolical. That's a disease. Those are not things of an intellectual person, a person of logic, a person of health and vitality. Those are qualities of somebody who is, as mentioned, diabolical and sinister. These are not smart people. They just happen to be manipulative. So we're talking more about this lie that, you know, of this particular story. So, you know, we started off lies about, you know, the presidency, all this other stuff. This story came along, and I thought this investigation was pretty fascinating. And we're going to hear another clip here that I think is remarkable about, well, how did this lie get started? Because you saw in the clip at the beginning from Doubt, the woman is told to gut the pillow with all the feathers and then try to pull it all back in. And of course, she cannot. And so it's kind of interesting is, okay, so this Matthew Shepard thing, you know, this is kind of interesting is like, well, is that what really happened? And is that the kind of place that Laramie is? Is that, you know, I mean, it's violent and they hate gays and blah, 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 whatever. And no, if you were around back then and you heard this story, there was no comfort to bring to the people that wanted to speak out about this. All the celebrities, it was like everybody's on board and, you know, everybody's got some foundation and all the rest of that shenanigan. There was no comfort by which these people could enjoy because they were freaked out. But it was all a lie.
What is the motivation of Matthew's friends? Why are they saying it's a hate crime?
You know, I talked to Walt Bolden, who was one of the guys who was putting forth this narrative. He was one of Matthew's friends.
I said that they had a responsibility to pass hate crime legislation because this was a hate crime. And for them to not say it was a hate crime was just a sham. And I don't think I used those words, but that was the gist of what I was saying. And that they couldn't call it a robbery and they couldn't call it something it wasn't. Nobody was going to pay attention to beating up a fag. And it was going to be brushed under the rug, called a robbery and forgotten about. And I didn't want it forgotten about. It needed to be addressed because everything was constantly being swept under the rug, and Matt deserved better than that.
And he talked about how difficult it was to be gay in Wyoming.
This was a period where bashing a fag or rolling a queer when you got drunk in a bar was a common thing, and people didn't even question it. So it wasn't a good time to be gay, much less to be an adolescent gay in a small town.
And how the struggles that Matt had being bullied for being gay. So I sort of started to understand while I was talking to this guy that when that's the context that you're living in and something like this happens, it just seems sort of logical to think, oh, this must have been about that. And so what they do is they start calling gay organizations, they start calling the press, and this narrative starts getting propagated. You know, I was really prepared to come at this guy, and I really was prepared to think of him as the villain of this story. And maybe, you know, I can't defend what he did. I mean, he was propagating something that he did not know to be true, and he was doing it so vociferously. And I asked him, like, how did you know what the motive was? And he just could not entertain for a moment the idea that it could have had anything to do with anything else. I asked him, like, have you ever let yourself wonder, was this not a hate crime? Nope. He's not even sort of going there. And I asked him about Matt's drug use, and he wrote off the whole thing the way you would smoking pot in college. You know, like he said something like,
it's just like people go through different phases and different periods, I guess, but drinking beer wasn't a big issue. Drinking alcohol wasn't a big issue. Smoking some pot wasn't a big issue. And so to say that Matt was somehow unusual because he was doing this.
Like what's to be had by trying to have this forensic evidence we uncovered that shows that actually it was just about drugs?
Is that worthwhile simply based on the fact that it may be true versus not true?
I think there's a point when you as a person should look around and see, like, read the room and what has happened. This is really important. What the understanding of what happened to Matthew means a lot to a lot of people. So just leave it alone.
There are times where I have to say, you know, I think I've heard it all, which of course I haven't, but and then I hear stuff like both of those people speaking, and I'm in shock because for me, a person of accountability and responsibility, that would never work for me. First of all, I wouldn't lie about something like that, but to sit there and say, read the room, or, you know, oh, I'm just, you know, why do you have to make such a big deal about this? Or, you know, this has a lot of meaning for people. Okay, but the meaning that they have is a lie. And not unlike the debate and everything that you've seen since then with social media and the media itself about our current president. And now I'm starting to think, well, what about other things that are lies? What about JFK? What about Watergate? What about, you know, the Pentagon Papers? What about the landing of the moon? I mean, there's a movie coming out about that too, so that'll be kind of fun to watch. But what about all of these lies? So, you know, the one reporter says, with this guy, Walt Bolden, you know, he says, you know, I was, you know, thinking, you know, that I wanted to make this guy the villain. But then he even tells you how he's rationalizing and justifying why. I don't know specifically all the reasons, right? I don't know what it is that's making him do that. But I can surmise that it's like, it's hard for a person to ingest the idea that this one individual gutted the pillow and let the feathers out, and there was no way to recollect it. The reality is that Walt Bolden ignited this lie. You've heard that phrase, of course, you know, you lied and I swore by it. Well, he is definitely one of the villains in the story. He avoided accountability and responsibility. He did not obligate accountability and responsibility to Matthew, who was a drug addict, the other two gentlemen who were drug addicts. The parents came out and they never They never copped to owning the fact that, this whole story has been a lie. Why? I don't know why. I can surmise, follow the money. The other gentleman that wants to sweep it under the rug and ignore it and lie to himself and others that there's justification and rationalization to keep the lie going. There's a motivation, there's a self-interest at work here. And what is it? Well, in his victimized thought mentality, that this is how it should be, that we need to have, we need to control other people's behavior. Okay, there is a dynamic that happens in a situation, any given situation, that if you try to control and manipulate it, you no longer, first of all, you're not living in the reality, and second of all, you are no longer having the opportunity of reality and nature to resolve the situation. So what do we know about nature? That nature will always bring order to disorder, or to what is seemingly disorder, but it will always bring order to something. And what's fascinating is that these people all lied about this. They have no idea what could have been for our society, what could have been for the gay community to be able to manage something completely different. Whatever it was, if it was hate legislation, or, if it was hate crimes, blah, blah, blah. We don't know the potential of something that could have been even better, but we won't know it because we forced it upon people. When you force something on people, then you are no longer in the reality. They are no longer in the reality. They're just trying to manage whatever is happening in that moment. All of this was followed by an interview with Katie Couric, who apparently had done an interview with the parents, and she never entertained, in her 25-year revisiting of the Matthew Shepard story with the parents, that another alternative narrative even existed. So what is her motivation in perpetuating the lie? Who benefits? What money is involved? Because you can quite often, follow the money trail and you will find out what the lie is.
Don't you love the bullshit they would say about, Chris Cuomo said this when he was talking to Dave Smith. He goes, well, the people who make ivermectin, they say it doesn't treat COVID. You know why? Because it's off patent, you fucking asshole. And they can't make money off it, so now anybody can make it, and it's pennies.
Yeah.
That's why. You don't know that, newsman?
Yeah. How the fuck did Dave Smith... No, I guess Dave Smith didn't know, but sitting next to that guy, how did he keep his cool? Dave Smith was he's so level-headed while that was going on. I was like, how the fuck did Dave Smith not lose his fucking mind talking to that guy?
It's good that there was a live audience there.
Yeah, but in the live audience, it's like, bullshit. Bullshit, dude.
Yes.
And when you see him say, I didn't do it, I didn't say that, and then there's a video clip of him
saying it.
How does he not know that?
And then he goes, well, he says that this was the information that we were being given. Yeah, and you're supposed to go out there and debunk the information you're being given by the government and Big Pharma. You're not just supposed to fucking repeat it.
If you just did one Google search of what is ivermectin.
That's it, he wouldn't do that.
That's all you had to do.
It doesn't take 5 minutes, it takes 30 seconds.
And you're like, it won a Nobel Prize for the guy who
human
invented
medicine?
it?
Oh my God.
Oh my God. It's one of the safest drug profiles ever observed. Ever.
Safer than Tylenol.
How crazy was it when Rolling Stone had that article about people
Rolling Stone's the worst.
waiting in line at the emergency room for gunshot wounds because so many people were overdosing on horse medication.
And they were all wearing coats in August in Kentucky.
How are those people not in trouble? How are they not in trouble for that? Because how many people could have gotten ivermectin and gotten over COVID and didn't get it?
Well,
I'm not even saying that it works. Let's just saying... Some people think it works. Some people that are fucking doctors, like Pierre Corey.
It certainly works.
87 different... there's like a bunch of different randomized controlled trials that shows efficacy.
So I really enjoy a lot of the different people that go on to Joe Rogan's show because they will speak to the reality. And I appreciate when they do that. Okay, so wrapping this whole thing up... we have to take ownership of reality. Because when lies are not being dealt with, the body will continue to create anxiety. Nature obligates order, and that order can only come from reality, from knowing the reality. When there is a cohesiveness between the mind and the body because you're living in reality, then you will start to experience a peacefulness. You'll experience a calmness. It can only come from having an experience of reality. And what is reality? We've talked about this, but let's revisit for anybody that's new to the podcast. Reality is the observation of what is. Reality lacks emotion. It has no agenda, right? We say things have agenda. It doesn't. It's just doing what it does. It literally is a honey badger. It doesn't give a shit, right? It will expose itself because it's the nature of itself. So if you think about this as you go through your week and you think about if you were to not try to involve yourself into certain situations and you just stand back, let it happen. See what happens. See what comes of it. The nature of the reality will expose itself. And the more you are accountable and responsible, the easier it is then to manage whatever comes out of those situations. You know, earlier in the year, we talked about the idea of cognitive dissonance and the understanding of when beliefs and actions are inconsistent and they are contradictory. And that's what we're experiencing, is that cognitive dissonance with lies. We've been told something over and over and over again with the president and the debate and all of the lies that he has espoused about another president and his record. We've been told all the lies about COVID and the different ways of being able to be healthy as a result of that. We've been told this lie about Matthew Shepard and what actually happened with that whole situation and the murder of a young boy who was not innocent in his choices. As you make choices in your life that have a foundation in accountability and responsibility, you will have a sense of being in the zone when you are experiencing reality, when you're experiencing a truth. And when you compound that experience with reality all around you, you will bring a peacefulness to your every moment in your life. You have to give into it. You have to trust yourself, right? You trust yourself that you will handle whatever comes your way because you're a person of responsibility and accountability. You know what your choices are, you own the experience, you own the outcome, and you will figure it out. And when you're able to do that, when you hear all the lies going on there and you know, that seems a little off, that flashpoint, that moment of inflection where you see or you hear something, you're like, that doesn't seem quite right. We've talked about use that moment, that it gets louder and louder and louder. And in all of the situations that I've outlined today, each one of them got louder and louder and louder. And it brought us right back to the reality that we knew from the very beginning. And that music means we are at the end of another podcast. Thank you so much for joining me this weekend. I hope you really enjoyed this particular podcast, especially as much as I enjoyed pulling it together for you. Hey, listen, hit that like button if you would. Share it with your family and friends. You never know how it's going to help them in their awakening of what's going on in reality. And if you'd like to check out my book, that's at lulu.com. I will see you here next week for another adventure. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for.